I'm Candace Morgan, a doctoral candidate at the College of Social Work at the University of South Carolina, and we are very honored today to talk to Jim Manning. So, Mr. Manning, let me start by asking you to share your thoughts about why social workers need to know something about the history, culture, and shared experiences of South Carolinians.
Well, I think that's a very important question, and the fact that I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, went to college in West Virginia, and then moved down to South Carolina. First I'd want to say that's really true pretty much anywhere you go, because particularly regionally, there are many unique things that are very different. Found that West Virginia, and then found that when I moved here. However, South Carolina, historically, when you start with the fact that it was the first state in the country to secede, and that's unique, and there are so many things that through its history still today goes back to that sense of uniqueness. When you're working with folks, you've got to know, not only what's going on with them currently, but what kind of things, both from their environment, from their family, from their own experiences, may be playing an impact into that. And, so particularly folks that are from South Carolina, born and raised, there's the family history, the family, what they pass down, depending on where you go to school. We've got counties and communities to where schools today are still pretty much segregated. The white kids are going to the private school, the academy, and the other folks are going to public schools. So there are counties where you see that uniqueness. South Carolina has the corridor of shame, which is the public schools along corridor I-95, with schools that, literally auditorium roofs are falling in, and we're still, as a state, trying to figure out a way to fix that. Well, one of the things that specifically I just learned a couple years ago when serving on Richland County Council, our county's considered uniquely rural and uniquely urban. And so I think that's important to social workers that come to Columbia to study. And of course, their placements may be in different outlying counties, but so that uniqueness right here in Columbia at the center of the state, and one of my colleagues who serves the lower Richland area, and he talks to me often about the 40 acres and a mule, which, through his family history goes back to after the Civil War, and the plantation owners provided 40 acres and a mule, and that's where families got started. And that's interesting in one sense, because some families had different levels of success than other families, but many of them, interestingly, look back that they all started with 40 acres and a mule. And yet, down in Lower Richland, they're 25 miles away from medical care, because they don't have a clinic, they don't have doctors, they have to drive into Columbia. So you have that kind of uniqueness, and how do you feel when you're growing up or living in a community? We don't have public transportation that serves that part of the county. We have many counties that have no type of public transportation. And then we have other counties, Sumter County, Williamsburg County, that have old school buses that drive workers down to the beach, to Myrtle Beach, to clean motel and hotel rooms. And so, it's important to know that kind of background and experiences that families are having that can be uniquely different than some other places. I remember one time I was visiting a foster home in Lower Richland County again, and there was a cotton field. Well, I had never seen a cotton field in Pittsburgh or West Virginia, And so I stopped my car and got out and walked and, picked a few pieces of cotton just to, see what cotton was when it was growing. And to use that opportunity to think about, folks that have picked cotton and how that fit into the history. So I think the big thing is to always look for opportunities, particularly personal opportunities, not necessarily a van as part of a class project, but go out and meet people, and when you're invited, go and see what that's all about. Sometimes I've found when some decisions are made and I don't really understand what it was or where the decision came from. Something that somebody had whispered in my ear was that sometimes when you look through the lens of race, you may understand more about that decision. And I have found that to be helpful words that were whispered in my ear one time. And, I guess one thing that served me well in any number of capacities is that I find people are really receptive when you don't put on airs and, you just tell them, I'm not from around here, and, or, I don't know the first thing, people get a kick out of, go out to parking lot, somebody had the hood up, and, I'd offer to help, but, all I can tell is the difference that's not the trunk because it's got all that mechanical stuff in it. And they just chuckle, but, so often people feel like, well, I'm a social worker, so I should have to know everything. I'm a man, so I should be able to talk about football and know about engines. And, when you go into another part of the state, they all know you're not from there, so don't even try to act like you are, because you're getting in deeper at that point. But one of the things that I found very interesting coming from another area is that many times you can be in and around the Columbia area and not see anybody but there's only about a 1.5 degree separation between folks who somebody works with somebody goes to church with somebody's married to somebody, it's their third cousin. So something that I guess I wish I learned earlier or got told or somebody whispered in my ear was, don't ever say anything bad about anybody, because somehow they're connected to the person you're talking to. One of the things that I'm known for on county council is that when my two colleagues, there are two gentlemen that represent Lower Richland area, and when the two of them are in agreement for something for their area that I really don't understand, I don't know that my constituents would understand. I don't even know if my constituents at my end of the county would even care. But I've learned that those two gentlemen understand that culture and that history, and if their two hands are going up, mine goes up with them. As a person very interested in politics, there are two altogether different cultures politically in South Carolina.
Would you speak to that?
Yeah, and it's obviously we have Democrats and Republicans, but we have a lot of what's called yellow dog Democrats, who, many times in how they vote here would be really considered pretty conservative. South Carolina, 35, 40 years ago, or really even about 30 years ago, everybody was a Democrat. And Strom Thurmond was really the first one to become a Republican. At that time, there was just this real, it was the segregation. We had started to integrate things across the country in particular, and there was still this vein in the South that was wanting to fight that. And what you have to remember is you're talking about 50s and 60s. Well, that means folks my age, many still have parents living who, were adults and young adults. And so they remember vividly going to a doctor's office and two different waiting rooms, two different water fountains, going down and being parts of marches, being there at the Orangeburg massacre, right down the road in Orangeburg County on the way to Charleston. And so, you know, for people in other parts of the country, that was sort of textbook, or they were watching on the nightly news something going on in the South that they were just watching on TV. And there are many people here who that's still a very real part of even their early adult life. Growing up in Pittsburgh and our study of the Civil War, I never knew it as the War of Northern Aggression until I moved down to South Carolina. You go to California, you go to Miami, and when you're talking about different races and diversity, even Charlotte, you know, you're seeing a little something different. In South Carolina, it's pretty much two races, and that's that. Another thing that's been interesting as folks look to come to USC to study social work is that I think there's many of us who felt like we really had some acceptance and some meeting of the minds around race relations, but at least within some political circles, really saw that wasn't really the case when we elected our first African American president. It brought some emotions out that to social workers seemed pretty clear that people who seemed to have moved forward in some regards, that really showed that you know, it was either repressed or it just brought some of that to the surface again, I found, as a social worker and somebody involved in it. I would take them down to the State House, but not inside the State House, but out on the grounds. And, you know, I'd see all the different groups, and they get off the bus, and they go up to the door, they go in, they have the tour inside, and that's all good stuff. But on the grounds of the State House, you have everything from the African American History Monument that you can learn so much just reading from, you know, where it started to where it is now. You've got the Confederate flag and all the history related to when and how it got on the dome, which is kind of interesting history. It was some anniversary of the Civil War, and apparently, from what I understand, is that, you know, at different times they just put different flags up for different events. And, you know, I mean, it could be Library Month, and the public library, you know, may hang there. So they kind of put different flags up for different reasons. And somehow they put that flag up and nobody took it down. And next thing we knew, it had been there for years and years and years. And then we had to deal with that. And so it's not the Confederate flag, there's a version of it, but, you know, very interesting to go back and look at the 2 years of compromise to even make that happen. And then you have the Strom Thurmond Monument that had to be re-etched when we learned about his daughter that was born to a slave, an African-American slave descendant, that he had taken care of financially for all the years. And there were always the rumors, but nobody knew until after he died. And well, they'd already put up the monument and they had etched in it the names of the children. And so now there's another name added onto that monument. And then there's all the different plantation and war heroes. And so if you take time walking around the grounds, you can see people and things and statues and memorials that you can take back with you and learn more about. But that, to me, is probably in this area the place that has the most that people know about the least. One of the things that I think is very important is obviously we have to remember every place is unique and we need to understand its uniqueness. However, where it was probably most poignant to me there was a superintendent search going on in one of our districts, District 2, out in the Northeast area. And I was invited to be on one of the groups that met with the folks that were doing the search. And the one I got in on, it had the administrative assistants for the district offices, because all the big shots had other kind of meetings, you know, but then sort of when they went to to the public and, you know, community folks, PTO folks. But anyway, this group that I was with, there were probably about maybe 12 of us in the room. And one of the people said to the person, well, I think it's really important that we get somebody that understands South Carolina. And so this professional from the search group said, well, we're located in Virginia, and, you know, we've done a lot of superintendent searches around the South, so, you know, we understand some of the unique features. And so this person was not going to be outdone, and they said, no, you know, I don't think you really heard about it. I think we really need somebody that understands South Carolina. Well, at this point, the professional gets a bit indignant, and because, you know, they already answered the question. And so they just repeated again, but a little more sternly about, you know, they worked through the South. And so the social worker me is looking over going, you know, it's like, and here are two people that, you know, still aren't communicating right. So I jumped in and I said, well, sir, you know, I think what the lady's telling you is that of all the states in the South that you're familiar with, there was one that was the first one to secede from the Union. He said, well, yeah. And I said, and there's only one that, you know, still flies the Confederate flag on the state grounds. And I said, there's only one that had a representative yell at the president in the State of the Union address, "You lie." And I said, you know, I mean, you do these searches, so I think you probably know about the corridor of shame. Does every state have one of those? Well, no. And I said, and of all the states in the South, do you know which one was the one where people had to sue for us to get the federal stimulus money? Oh, yeah, that was some. Oh, okay, enough said. So, you know, that just that day helped me crystallize, even after being here for 3 decades, that South Carolina really does have some very unique things that set it apart from some other places. South Carolina is an extremely exciting place to be a social worker because for the most part, particularly in social issues, we're in the top 5 of all the things you want to be in the bottom 5, and in the bottom 5 of all the lists you want to be in the top 5. But that also means there's a lot of need for community organization to make changes if you're interested in the macro level. And on the micro level, there are a lot of people, there are a lot of couples, a lot of families that have a great deal of need and a lot of hurt, because being in the bottom 5 or the top 5 in the list you want to be on the other means there are some things that just really aren't that good in your life. So as a professional social worker in South Carolina, I think there are a lot of opportunities, macro and micro, to make a difference, and I think we all get into social work to make a difference.